There are videos online that Australians simply cannot see, posts that are quietly disappeared from your feed, and here's the thing about censorship. You don't know what you don't know. In George Orwell's 1984, the Ministry of Truth didn't announce when it erased something. Things simply stop existing. No notice, no explanation, and no record that they were ever there. Australia has a government office that has been quietly removing posts from social media without telling people whose content has disappeared, and until very recently, without any way for those people to fight back. The office is called eSafety. Before I detail eSafety's censorship regime, I want to be upfront about something. Some of the things that eSafety does are legitimately important. They do things like protecting kids online, removing child abuse material, dealing with cyberbullying, and I'm not going to stand here and say I'm against any of that. But what I want to show you is what happens when those powers go beyond protecting children and they start reaching into things like political opinion, democratic debates, and public discussion. And how that was done through a system that was specifically designed to stay hidden. A little bit about the history. eSafety was created in 2015, but the original name and intention was totally different to what we understand now. When it was created, it was called the Enhancing Online Safety for Children Act. This was focused and specifically intended for children and their safety. And Julian McGrant, the commissioner, still uses this framing today. Here's what she said in a major interview just last year.
When I came to eSafety, as what was then the Children's eSafety Commissioner, that was formed in 2015 after a tragic death by a female celebrity who took her life after being terribly trolled on Twitter. Our Minister for Communications, Malcolm Turnbull, knew that we really had to start with children first, because you can't really argue that children aren't vulnerable.
She said this in 2024. Children first. Hard to argue with that, right? And I guess that's the point. But then in 2021, the Online Safety Act quietly expanded the office's power to adults, cyber abuse, and a broad range of content types. And the power to issue formal removal notices backed by fines of up to $165,000 per day. A budget that went from $10.3 million a year to $42.5. That is a 300% increase. And I think this makes it particularly concerning. Senator Malcolm Roberts filed a Freedom of Information request asking a simple question. Does eSafety have any written policy to protect Australians' right to political speech? The answer, in eSafety's own words,
quote, there are no dedicated guides or policies with respect to the interaction of the implied right of political communication in use by the eSafety Commissioner or personnel.
eSafety's own Freedom of Information response to Malcolm Senator Roberts, let me reiterate, there are no protections for free speech. And without playing the entire video, the gentleman uses about 3 minutes to explain no, they don't do this. Senator Roberts responds in this conversation and says,
so you're saying to hell with the Constitution?
No, not at all.
The eSafety representative obviously said no, but then went on and couldn't name a single safeguard that exists. The video that I'm talking about is on Senator Roberts' website, if you want to go check it out. A powerful government regulator with tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of funding, has the power to fine platforms with no written policy to protect political speech. Keep that in mind. Let's look at some of the key timeline events, some core memories, and cast our mind back to The Voice. In August 2023, Australia was a few months out from the Voice to Parliament referendum. It was a constitutional vote, one of the most significant democratic events the country had seen in years. Commissioner Grant made a public statement at the time, warning that online abuse of Indigenous Australians was, quote, likely to intensify. As the vote approached, she called it highly concerning. Here's what you need to understand about why saying something like that in a public forum matters. eSafety is not some online commentator. It's not like Ben Shapiro or Sky News. It is a government regulator that can fine platforms $165,000 for refusing a removal notice. So when it speaks publicly about one of these issues, one of the most important constitutional votes of our time, every platform, X, Facebook, anyone is listening. What did eSafety's own internal data actually show about the comments that they made? Thank you to another Freedom of Information request, we know the answer. And it's very, very different to how they portrayed it in the public narrative. From eSafety's own Freedom of Information request records, only 2 complaints linked specifically to the voice referendum across an entire campaign. Indigenous Australian complaints were 0.4% of eSafety's total workload that quarter, and 0 takedown notices were issued to any platform based on those complaints. In the same period, eSafety received 2,293 image-based abuse complaints and 3,258 illegal content complaints, categories the Commissioner did not hold public press conferences about. So what actually happened here? A government regulator used their public platform to create just a narrative about intensifying harm during a constitutional vote without any factual basis. And here's the key point. You don't need to actually take a single post down to suppress debate. The warning and the public press conference from an office with the power to punish these platforms is essentially enough to shut down that conversation. Both the platforms and the users are threatened by this public initiation, with the platform owners probably proactively censoring information if they get the opportunity, because that would help them avoid the fines and the controversy that would come along with it. And the users maybe being hesitant to post anything. And it's a really, really chilling effect that an eSafety commissioner like this can come out and make these public statements with the facts that we just heard. And you might be thinking, okay, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this was just a genuine mistake. Maybe she believed that there was a problem and it just didn't show up in the data. It can happen. If we look at other information, we can show that this is actually a pattern rather than an isolated error. The system that eSafety uses to remove content, the day-to-day removal system that honestly most Australians have never even heard of, operates in secret. Most people never know that any censorship has happened to them, and until most recently there was no legal way to challenge it. We would call it a shadow notice system. Before we get into the shadow notice system, let's talk about how things are actually supposed to work. Parliament designed the removal system, and it has real safeguards. The removal system looks like this. eSafety receives a complaint and checks whether it meets the legal threshold. The content has to be menacing, harassing, or offensive, and intended to cause serious harm. If it clears that bar, eSafety issues a formal written notice to the platform under Section 88 of the Online Safety Act. The platform then has a legal obligation to comply, or they start facing those fines. The person whose content was removed is then informed. They then have the right to appeal to the Administrative Review Tribunal. Those safeguards, especially the right to appeal, exist for a reason. Parliament designed them deliberately to make sure the Commissioner can't act as judge, jury, and executioner. How many formal notices does eSafety issue per year? 3 to 4. That's it. So instead of using this formal system, eSafety developed what it's called an informal complaint alerts. Messages sent through platforms' legal request systems. No formal notice, no legal threshold required, no obligation to tell the person that posted the content. No clear right to appeal. At least that was the eSafety's position. So we heard about the 3 to 4 that were sent a year through the official system, and how many were sent in 1 year under the shadow system? 383 under just one scheme, adult cyber abuse. That's from eSafety's own annual report, their own data. Content from those cases were removed 284 times. So 74% of those cases, without people being involved or told why their posts are being disappeared, were removed. And eSafety then went on to argue in court that those people had no right to challenge it because the notice was informal. She didn't use the formal approach, so you didn't get the rights. So let's discuss the case that sort of blew the lid off this sort of thing. There was a woman named Baumgarten, and I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. In May 2024, she posted a video on X raising concerns about a queer club running in a Melbourne primary school for kids aged 8 to 12. She wrote in that post, "Children should not be learning about sexualities at such a young, impressionable age. Leave kids alone." Doesn't seem too controversial for me. eSafety sent an informal complaint alert through X's or Twitter's legal portal. X or Twitter, seeing it arrive through official legal channels, geo-blocked the post, which means that anyone in Australia wasn't able to see it. For 2 months, Baumgarten had no idea why her post had vanished. Then, when the Free Speech Union helped her challenge it, eSafety sent a King's Counsel to tribunal to argue the notice and that it couldn't be repealed. And the reason it couldn't be repealed was because she sent it informally, or the eSafety office sent it informally. And here's the part that should make your jaw drop. eSafety admitted during the proceedings that the post did not actually meet the legal threshold for removal. They sent the notice anyway. This means that eSafety's informal notice system was actually the predominant regulatory mechanism. It was the one that we're using the most to take down posts. The system created a way less transparent process. So what was the result of this? It was that the courts ruled against eSafety 3 times. The Administrative Review Tribunal in February 25, again in August 25, and then a full federal court in February 2026. It went all the way to federal court. Each time eSafety appealed and kept fighting. Parliament has now called for a formal investigation into the misuse of these powers because of the potential shadow system they're using. Now, this isn't the only example. We'll talk about one more case, and this one's pretty quick. It's pretty clear as well, and an example of how the powers have sort of ended up where they are. Chris Elston, who is known as Billboard Chris, is a Canadian activist who campaigns against gender medical procedures for minors. He shared a Daily Mail news article about how transgender activists who had been appointed to the World Health Organization's gender expert panel. His comment on the post, quote, "This is who Australia's eSafety Commission says must be protected from criticism," end quote. eSafety classified this as cyber abuse and ordered X to remove the post globally. We talked about geo-blocking before, like just a location. This was a global removal notice. On the 1st of July 2025, the Administrative Review Tribunal found that the takedown order was unlawful. Deputy President Damien O'Donovan said there was no evidence of intent to cause serious harm, which is a part of the legal thresholds we looked at earlier. The post was political opinion on a matter of public policy. The takedown order was essentially unlawful. So think about what this means. It means that there was no violence, no threats, no harassment, a newspaper article shared with a political opinion attached. That's it. And they classified it as cyber abuse, then ordered to get it taken down through the entire world, not just Australia, the entire world. Again, going back to child safety, this is political speech. You're not protecting any children taking these actions. So before we get to the conclusion, there are a few other cases that I want to look at. Very, very specific things that the eSafety Commissioner has tried to censor or remove from online, because the pattern that we're talking about goes beyond the single cases that we've discussed. In 2024, Bishop Mari Emanuel was poked with a very sharp object during a live stream church service in Sydney. The footage was seen completely around the world. It went viral. eSafety ordered X to remove the footage and then sought a global removal order, meaning that Australians and people overseas would not be able to see a video of a domestic terror attack on Australian soil. The federal court rejected the global extension, and critics pointed out something fundamental. Australians have the right to know when a terror attack happens in their own country. Governments trying to suppress that footage doesn't protect people. It hides information from them. Now, another case, and I'm going to butcher this name, bear with me here, Iriana Zarutska. In September 2025, CCTV footage was publicly released showing the murder of Ms. Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee killed on a train in the United States. The footage circulated internationally and was covered by almost every major news outlet. eSafety issued a 20-page removal notice to Twitter demanding the takedown of 23 posts featuring that footage, with fines of up to $825,000 per day, threatening for non-compliance. This is crazy. If something like this happens in a subway in America, it means that either the police or the subway itself have released the footage for people to see. The Free Speech Union filed a legal challenge, arguing the notice breached Australia's implied freedom of political communication. Think about that for a moment. Publicly released footage in America of a violent crime covered by the global news media being censored specifically for us, the Australian audiences, by the eSafety Commission. And then they threaten them with massive daily fines with the enforcement mechanism. Across all of these cases, the Voice referendum, Celine, Billboard Chris, the church attack, the murder footage, there are very, very consistent themes here. The removal happens quietly, without any public announcement. The person affected usually doesn't even know that their content has been removed. And the legal safeguards Parliament designed, the thresholds, notifications, right to appeal, are bypassed. through the informal notice system or the shadow system. When the courts push back, eSafety appeals and keeps fighting. The common thread here isn't child safety. It's a regulatory body using broad powers to control what you and I in Australia can see. It's about democratic debates, crimes, public policy disagreements, and there's minimal transparency, almost no accountability. So where does this all leave us? Where do we go from here? The eSafety Commissioner was clearly created to protect children online, and no one argues with that. But what's been building since then and the changes, they're much larger and way less accountable. An office with a $42.5 million annual budget, 4 times what it started with no written policy to protect your freedom of speech, which was confirmed in their own Freedom of Information response. A removal system that bypasses legal safeguards 99% of the time, with the 383 informal notices versus the 3 to 4 formal notices per year, court findings of unlawful conduct 3 times from 3 different courts, public claims about the voice referendum and its own data contradicted, an attempt to hide footage of a domestic terror attack, a global censorship order on a post that was purely political opinion. And the question I want to leave you with isn't really about any of these single cases, because they're really just evidence to show what I'm talking about. It's bigger than that. When a government office can remove content from the internet without telling you, without meeting a legal threshold, and without a transparent process, and then spends years in court arguing that anybody has the right to challenge it, that's not child safety anymore. That's censorship. And it was built quietly, funded generously, and run without the kind of accountability that democracies are supposed to require. The courts have started to push back. Parliament has started asking questions, and the office still exists. The powers are still there, and as of this video, there is no written policy guaranteeing that political speech is protected from the very regulator that was built to keep children safe. So who watches the watchers? According to eSafety's own Freedom of Information response, almost no one, because there's no policy requiring it. If you like this video, please subscribe. It really does help me quite a lot. Send it to your friends. Keep talking about this sort of stuff. We really have to push back. I really appreciate you watching this video if you got all of this way. Thank you.